Minutes of the hour of 9 o'clock. My name is Jagenda Semakola Ziksoka. Welcome to UBC TV. Good morning, Uganda. Extra today. My name is Jagenda Semakola Ziksoka once again on UBC TV Live. Thank you so much for choosing to be with us on yet another day. It is the 14th of June in this year, 2022, and another very lovely day that the Lord God has given to us. Now, this is one of those very big and important days in our country and, of course, in our region of East Africa. A day that we all, as member states of the East African region, read our yearly budgets, and today is our budget day here in Uganda and of course in the rest of the East African countries or partner states on this particular day. But just before we get into that conversation, just want to remind you that on the 26th of this month it will be the full coronation of Bishop Dr. Livingstone Banjagala, and this will be of course to install him to the position of the UN Peace Ambassador here in Uganda, and the Vice President of Uganda is expected to grace this particular ceremony. We congratulate you, Bishop Livingstone Banjagala, upon this very big milestone in your career, as a servant of the Lord God and a servant of this country and a servant of humanity. Bishop Banjagala will be installed on the 26th to the position of the UN Peace Ambassador here in Uganda. We congratulate you, Bishop Banjagala. Now we'll get to the conversation. Like I said, on this day, later today, the UBC TV will be live in Kololo, bringing you the live coverage of the budget speech or the budget reading that will be coming your way. We'll be receiving a budget for year 2022-2023 on this particular day today. But with me in studios, just before we get into all the conversation, I will take the opportunity to have a conversation here with Mr. Gilbert Ruchiri Ariho. He is the head of tax at PKF Uganda, an audit firm. You're very welcome, Mr. Ariho.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jagenda. Good morning, viewers. It's a pleasure to be on this show to discuss matters tax and about this budget.
Thank you very much. I am really very honored to have you this morning, and because we're getting ready for the budget that's coming our way, a 48.1 trillion budget that we have, and of course, the most important thing in this whole thing is where do we get the money to actually implement or to actually fulfill the proposals that we have in our budget. And here is where we are. Let's start with the economy as it stands now. The economy seems to be growing fast, but of course with challenges here and there. Let me first hear your thoughts as a tax expert on the growth of the economy.
I think, Mr. Jagenda, we are in unprecedented times. The last couple of years have not been easy. If you look at the lockdown days and currently where we are, the economy has averagely grown at about 3%. The financial year which we are just concluding was projected to grow at about 4.7, and of course we are yet to get the actual figures. And while the one we are budgeting for is projected to grow at about 6.2. But if you look at all this, is that in terms of there has been stagnation, because we all know that we've always grown at an average rate above 5. So when we have 3, then there is a problem. We've seen poverty levels increase by about 5%, according to the World Bank study. So that means that if you ask the question, are we growing fast enough to collect revenue? The answer might be no, but I think to put this into a fair perspective is that with or without economic growth, the government obligations stay. So the government has to find a way in one way or the other to ensure that they raise this revenue. So now what happens is that we should not only look at the growth, but we need to look at the reality on the ground. How do we keep the government moving, and how does the government also inspire or trigger further growth within the economy? So I think when you look at it, yes, we have economic hard times. We don't see these actually change in the near future, but what will actually continue to happen, and what we'll see is that it will be tough times ahead for both the taxpayer and the tax collector as well. Because if the economy is not performing, then it means there will generally be less to collect. However, government civil servants, the government as we know it, must be financed, it must be facilitated. So tough times ahead.
Looking at the growth, of course, of the economy, because we keep hearing these figures from the experts, yourselves, the economists telling us, of course, we've been growing at this, or we regressed and then grew maybe at this or so. But is that growth, the economic growth, is it commensurate with individual household income levels? Because there are people of forever, even when you get into the different budget speeches, the different budget papers, and whenever you talk about growth, but you notice that Ariho has not grown, Semakula has not grown, Ruatoro has not grown, and you know, you talk about that growth, but Ariho is stunted somewhere.
Of course, there has been several concerns about the divorce or the diverge between the figures reported and actually the reality on the ground. It seems for the common man, it's tough times. So when you hear about the growth, someone says, I've not seen it in my personal wallet, which is an area of concern. But as we've seen, especially with these COVID kind of issues, we have had a challenge. And this challenge has been that the divide between the high income and low income earners has greatly increased. So a small class of people are maybe amassing part of this wealth. When you average it out, there will be growth. But it might be growth reflected in a few people's kind of wallets or pockets. So that in a way could explain why we are having growth, but several people are not seeing it. Unfortunately, it is also a global phenomenon that we are now seeing. The billionaires are still making quite a killing, while those who are struggling to get basic needs like food, healthcare are still struggling. So it is, I think, the growth is there, but it is maybe not equitably distributed among the population.
Okay, very important. Now, lately, there's a conversation of we getting into the lower middle income status, and we'll talk about that now. That comes also because these are global parameters that we use to gauge or measure middle income and etc. etc. I saw the middle income status that we talk about is $1,039, and the essence is so many people look at themselves and say, okay, do I really earn $1,000 in a year? Now, even a boda man who rides and possibly get 3 million or 4 million throughout the entire year don't see themselves just getting in there. What needs to be done, and first of all, how do we even understand it? When we qualify ourselves and say we have also now qualified or gotten into the lower middle income status, what changes to somebody? Because if I am promoted from senior 3 and next year I'm actually getting into S4, then I look at myself as a candidate and say, last year I was in S3 class, this year I'm actually in S4. When we get into the lower middle income status, how do I even feel I've actually been promoted from one status to another status?
I think that is the fundamental question that is on the mind of every Ugandan. Yes, we could progress into middle income status as a country. The question remains, what is the ordinary Ugandan getting out of all this? So the moment the ordinary Ugandan is not getting much out of this, then it remains something that we have on paper. It remains something that is not very practical. And like I've initially said, most of these economic figures are averages. So they at times look at the average of a top earner or a top entrepreneur in the economy and one who is at the bottom. So at the end of the day, when we attain this middle income status, the question should be how is this income being distributed in terms of the population in general. And of course, that is where I think government comes in with government policies to see whether the taxation is right, to ensure that maybe those who are having quite something are fairly taxed, and maybe services to the local person. Because you would expect as an ordinary citizen that as we progress to the middle income status, you should see better infrastructure in terms of road, you should see better healthcare, and among others. better education, maybe free education at that, in the real sense and essence of it. Yeah.
Okay, now we have a budget, of course, that is going to be read to us today, and it's a 48.1 trillion budget, which is about 12 point something billion US dollars. And ultimately, of course, at the end of the day, is we will listen to the budget, and the government will tell us we want to do these things in the next financial year. And after saying all that to us, then we look to government to say it's your obligation, whether there is a crisis or no crisis. I need Medicare, I need education, I need security, I need water, I need sanitation, I need all the things, I need roads, I need etc. Where are we going to get the money, especially when we talk about our shrinking tax base? That seems not to actually be even increasing or growing bigger.
Yeah. Of course, as a country, we've had a challenge, and we find ourselves in a peculiar situation, in that compared to our peers in sub-Saharan Africa or within the East African community, that our tax to GDP ratio has stagnated at about 13, and now I think due to COVID that this figure could have come down to almost 12 or 11. So that sends a huge signal that not only are we underperforming in terms of the economic growth, but also the ability to tax and collect revenues has not been a simple task. And of course, this, like you're saying, is about the tax base, in that not enough people are within the reach of the taxman to pay their fair share of this. So as we look at the slowdown of the economy, and like I've already indicated, the government obligations are actually remain almost standard. Of course, we could do something about it, about the expenditures, that, and we reprioritize what we need to spend on as a country better. But from a revenue mobilization perspective, is that we are not yet efficient enough if we compare with our peers within the region. So that is where I see, and this budget and basically the tax policy or amendments that we are looking at. This year is quite unique also. We've not seen a lot of increments. We've only seen a lot on the administrative side, which is a welcome move. That we are not saying that, because the question that I often get is, like we've been talking about growth. Growth is maybe 3-6%. But you find the URA targets are maybe 15 percentage points. So the question is, if we are growing at 3 and you're increasing the budget by 15%, where do we get all this? But the issue is that when you look at our statistics, not enough people are paying taxes. A few are paying the taxes. So and I think the technocrats this time, if we can maintain this, then I think it is the first step in the right direction. Of course, we've always had a challenge as a country in terms of policy. This year, one step. Next year, they go back to the drawing board and first go retract. So I think it's a matter of being consistent, and the challenge has been, if you look at our the GDP, our tax to GDP ratio of about 12%, 13%. The question, I think, is not that the current taxpayers are not paying enough. The issue seems to be that those who are within the reach of the taxman are actually very few. So I would have, of course, loved to see many more policies that are directly motivated towards to bring as many Ugandans into the tax-paying bracket as possible. Because if you look at it, it means that there are certain areas that are not being taxed. So that, to me, is what I would like to see the URA doing, and the Ministry of Finance. And we see the start of this this year, that they have tended to look at administration and not necessarily revised a lot of percentages in terms of tax or imposing new taxes.
And I think this particular budget that has not attracted any new taxes. I am thinking, I've not got into the detail of it, but I'm sure it has not brought in those. But choosing the analogy of an aircraft, like the Minister for Finance normally does, with our economy, if our economy was actually this vessel, this aircraft, is it taxing now, or it's already a takeoff? Or we just need to know, because like you said, we walk a few steps ahead, then again walk some steps backwards. Are we already at takeoff, as we normally hear from you, the experts, or we are still taxing? We just still finding the runway where we can actually get the stability, then of course run for takeoff?
Yeah, I think the accountant in me would like to remain prudent and say, yes, we seem to be in the right direction. We could be on the tarmac, taxing, maybe about to get airborne, given the analogy. Because if you look at the challenges that we currently have in terms of revenue mobilization, most of these seem to be much bigger issues than actually the taxman can handle. And you know, especially if you've worked in tax for some time, it is there is what we call the last cow kind of curse. You know, when people are, those who are pastoralists, they are putting cows into a crash. It's the last one that gets beaten, even when the front one is not moving and the last one is moving. So when there is underperformance, of course, a lot of responsibility will be thrown at the tax collectors, the URA, maybe Ministry of Finance. But all this starts with the generally how is our economy organized. If, for example, today, even if, say, you wanted to tax, say, the border cyclists, how would you enforce it? So that means that from the way they are regulated, from the way they are licensed, there should be that mechanism. So, and in a lot of other sectors, say retail shoppers, of course some of these are still earning very low, but as a nation we need to look at this. Tax and revenue collection in so many ways is a product. It comes at the end of several other functions and processes within the economy. So if that planning is not properly done, it's like a funnel. The government and URA put their cap at the end of the funnel. So the question is, what is getting in?
How much is poured into?
Yes, what is getting in? Yes, you could be pouring in water, but as someone gone and put a plastic clog that takes it all the way down. So unless you come and inspect and make sure that everything is rightly done in terms of how businesses are regulated, how they're incorporated, how they're being tracked, so all that, it will be much easier. And that's why you see, of course, we've seen some new innovations. But of course, some of these new innovations, like say IFRIS, where the government wants now to have real-time information for tax collection and other maybe statistics and decision making. They are welcome. But some of these are still targeting those who are already on the register or the taxman. They are not targeting, say, someone who is not on the register. Of course, they could be expanded, and we've seen some few innovations here and there. They are welcome. But that still remains largely the issue that we have. So I think when you look at the growth vis-a-vis the revenue mobilization that the government will require, there is a lot of potential. However, the issue has been the implementation and generally trying to formalize our economy the way we know it.
What plans do you have to increase and to grow our tax base? Because you will talk to me, of course, as an accountant and a taxman. There's always been a cry over multiple taxations from a couple of people, from just a few people. It's one Jagenda who does this and that and that and that, and it's actually him that revenue keeps running to for that and that and that and that taxes to help so many other people out there, yet we are too few just right here. Then the other day, of course, we saw what happened to us. We started, I think, in January this year, 8th January, tolling the road, the entire expressway. And somebody says, I buy a car and revenue taxes me. I go and buy fuel at Shell or Total or this petrol station, I am taxed in there. I do all the things, so I've already given taxes. Now, even using a road, which I actually paid for, you are again asking me for money for the toll fees and many of these things. How do we seem to understand all these, and how should they even help us grow? Because at the end of the day, we demand for services from government. We need security here, we need education, we need salaries. We demand for salaries as medics or teachers or etc. And these are some of the initiatives that, okay, the government says we took a loan from this bank, and so this is how we pay back the loan. If you want to drive on this road conveniently, pay us some money, we pay that date, but somebody says, Ariho says, Ojagana says, but this is our road. We already pay the taxes for our roads. What we need to do to understand these things?
Yeah, I think technically and from a strict point of it is when you talk about double taxation, this often does not happen all the time. What happens technically is that because of what I've been explaining to you, that one, government must find avenues
of collecting money,
of running the government as is. You also know that, so that is one. That's why you see some of these several innovations. The challenge has been that fewer people are paying this tax. So Mr. Jagan, at times you feel a bigger pinch because
you're too few.
Yes, it's you who owns the car, and therefore you'll be driving to Entebbe. It's you who flies out of the country. And any other ordinary citizen, say who is even outside the radar, will not actually maybe pay as many times as you're doing. So the whole issue is about broadening the tax base, bringing on board as many people as possible. That's one. The other aspect also is that, like you've been saying, later on, of course, we could get into the discussion what government is specifically is doing to have this economy triggered or rejuvenated, to have the economic growth that we are talking about, such that everyone can experience this middle income status that we are moving into. So that is the other aspect, that of course there is a correlation between a healthy economy and revenue collection. So that is one of the aspects. So if you have a healthier economy, then so that also still goes to government. Are we going? What are we specifically doing? Are we having the infrastructures right? Are we having the power and other priced right to spur this development? What other incentives are we giving to entrepreneurs? So that is where the story now goes, because right now I have a feeling, and when you have the experience of representing several taxpayers, you see there is fatigue. Not enough people are carrying the load. So and of course, and these are the same people when the last cow kind of case I was telling you, whenever they say we've run short of 100 billion, they go to those who have already contributed something.
To milk from them again.
Yes. So at times technically you find that actually it's not that the tax man is being unfair, but you feel that they are being too extremely at times harsh on those that are already contributing vis-a-vis if we had several others. And that's why we would see taxes coming down, like you've been saying, because if you are an employee and say your effective tax rate is 30% or above for some individuals, and then you go to a supermarket, you're still contributing the 18%. Then you drive on the express highway, you're still paying a 5,000 per entry and exit. So you find that the burden is quite high. So and I think that is where the feeling comes in. But technically, arguably, you would not find a double taxation as such, but only that the base is quite still small and fewer people are carrying the load, and that's why they are feeling it. So, and especially people in the informal sectors, they tend to get away with some of these, all their rates being much lower. So the question has been, are they necessarily earning at lower thresholds that maybe taxing them would not make even an economic sense, or would maybe cause adverse effects? Or is it an issue of simply saying that these individuals, that because of the setup of the economy, it's difficult to catch them? Because I've been having, at times we have some of these challenges to ourselves. You wonder, say, salaried primary school teacher, maybe about 500, 600,000 shillings gross, is taxed. an equivalent say of a border rider could actually take home about 30,000 a day, averaging to about 90,000. Do they pay the same tax at the end of the day? So some of these are the questions, and that's why you find those who are in formal employment having such sentiments about double taxation. But it all boils to one thing: smaller tax base, and also the economy not being as vibrant as it should be, to say there is more to collect.
Not so long ago, when the president spoke to the nation before the State of the Nation address, he addressed us on the state of the economy. And I think that's a time when he said, if bread is very expensive because wheat is expensive, let's resort to cassava because we can afford cassava. And I think he was misunderstood on that particular one. But one of the arguments there were that people are expecting him to say, we are actually going to cut taxes on X, Y, or Z. The conversation of cutting taxes on certain things, do you think that can actually help us? Politicians are saying, reduce the taxes on maybe vegetable oils or wheat, flour, etc., to make edibles available and affordable, chapati, chikomando, etc. Does it solve the problem, reducing taxes or cutting taxes on some of the essential commodities as we're talking about them?
I think, of course, it must be a calculated move. One, not because it's right, but about also the effects. You don't want to have a government that is broke. Because even if the intentions were good, it could spell disaster in several aspects. So that said, it needs to be looked at. What are we cutting the taxes on? Where are we reducing? And what are we going to get out? I think the economists at Ministry of Finance must be looking into some of these and advising the president accordingly. But without a doubt, I think generally our tax regime needs to be looked into. If you look at, for example, the common tax to an individual, which is, say, employment tax, it sets in after just $235,000, less than $100. So it means that everything that you get over and above that is taxed, almost effectively at about 30%. So if you look at less than $100, because a dollar is almost at 3.8 now, it would almost mean that about 70, you only have a tax-free kind of threshold of about $70. So now, that threshold is quite small. It does not in itself leave sufficient money in the hands of the population to consume. So it also has an adverse effect. I'm not a supporter of quick reaction, of saying because we're having some of the challenges we're having, then tax rates ought to be cut. It needs to be a strategic policy, a strategic move. So, and I think one of those is to increase our thresholds. And over time, also I think the 30% for corporation companies, it is something that we can look at and bring down. Because, and then instead of giving, say, a select sectors some bit of, say, exemptions, tax holidays to a few people, I think the general trend should be, can we bring it down? Or can we have it banded? Because if you find a company that is, say, has a turnover of $1 billion shillings paying tax at 30% on their profit, and you have another one with 100 billion, you see, you might this one might never grow into an adult, if I may use that analogy. So that is a policy. It should be a strategy to look into overall. But yes, at times in times of crisis, then those could be immediate reliefs. If, for example, you find people can't afford wheat, they can't afford to have chapati to eat or bread to eat, then yes, government can make a unilateral decision to temporarily intervene. But overall, cutting tax rates can only give temporary solutions and relief. And by the mind, some of the business people, even if they were to do that, it might not trickle down to the intended consumers. If today they say that, for example, we've waived because now one of the issues is fuel. If they waive taxes on fuel, I don't think the pump prices will get down even in the next 2 months. So I think government also looks at most of these aspects, and they are not so sure about how they will impact on the economy. But I think it is a delicate balance of keeping the boat afloat. And even if it's not moving as fast, as opposed to try and move it fast and maybe sink it. So that is the feeling I get. But from a general point of view, I think some of our tax rates are high, especially from the individual perspective. They do not give enough thresholds, because you can imagine if just $70, it's not even sufficient at times for the actual cost. So those are the areas would want to see some bit of the changes.
If you were given an opportunity as an accountant, and of course a person who has been at tax issues, to suggest a new tax, what tax would you suggest? Or if you were given another opportunity to scrap a tax, which one would you say they should scrap this?
I think I wouldn't want to suggest new taxes. When you look at our tax legislation as is, I think it is sufficient. We tend to have even much more than we've actually asked for. In terms of where are we missing out. So I would not propose to look at new taxes.
You wouldn't?
I wouldn't suggest a new tax. I would, on the contrary, look at making the current environment from a tax perspective more competitive, make it easier for taxpayers to pay. I would basically go into the administration aspect of it. How are these taxpayers being managed? Because the psychology of many taxpayers is also wrong, as opposed to giving them an incentive of dropping. You know, at times when some of these, you remember the story of graduated tax. I was young when it was dropped, but yes. But later on, some of the adverse effect is that some men became lazy up country to work, because some were working not to be embarrassed by failing to pay their own taxes, and that spurred some bit of development in itself, however crude the tax itself was and maybe inefficient. So when you come and we're looking at new proposals and new taxes, I think where we need now to concentrate more on is about administration. How are taxpayers being handled? How is the taxman being supported by government? You know, it is also, are the targets given to them anywhere realistic? Yes, someone will come and simply sit somewhere and tell you, yes, we are collecting 13%. Other countries are maybe closer to 20. But do they have the same economic kind of environment as we do have? Or it is different? Like I've told you, it comes in. You see, it's almost like a computer system. Garbage in, garbage out. So if we do have a lot of informalities, if the economy is not properly structured and supervised, then the chances that you will easily mobilize the revenue, so that every citizen and every entrepreneur and every business fairly contributes, because we all enjoy these public services, all these public goods, it becomes a challenge. So the issue would not be about new taxes, the issue would not be dropping which taxes. The issue would be the administration. The issue would be looking into the plight of some sectors. Like employment, you would want to look at agriculture, what is there. Should they also pay the same tax rate? Like someone say who is maybe a commercial entity. So that is why the discussion, I think, should be on administration as opposed to new taxes or even dropping them. Because you drop them, then you could easily destabilize the entire financing and running of government. But it can be a gradual process. Instead of dropping a tax, instead of say dropping tax maybe like VAT, could we reduce it? Could we get it from 18% maybe gradually, and we set a target of 10 maybe in the next 10 years? But that is, as you reduce it, it means you're bringing on board other taxpayers. It means the economy is growing. So if you are unable to spur the economy to grow, if you are unable to expand the tax base, then I think we shall remain where we are. We shall not move much.
The other biggest thing with the economy is borrowing behavior. and also our debt servicing. Because I'll tell you, much of the money that we're going to collect in this budget is there is this big chunk of the percentage of that is actually going to service the gigantic and enormous loans that we've accumulated over the time. What needs to be done with that, especially when you talk about debt servicing, and the one-inch like ourselves, when they tell you we will collect all this money, but this money is actually going to pay to service a big debt that we have out there, it demoralizes many people to say, how do we all contribute all this money? We still lack on this, and the money is actually being channeled to somebody to pay a debt that we possibly don't know what it did.
Yeah, I think the issue of our national debt has been of concern to several citizens, and I think it's come to several discussions. For starters, I think we need to acknowledge and know that there is no government that is not indebted. All governments borrow. So what is happening here is not new. I think the context of the Ugandan case would be, if you're borrowing, are we borrowing for the right causes? The causes might be right, but do we go ahead to implement? Because just like an individual, when you borrow, you must plan how are you going to pay back. So meaning that you need, in every aspect, need to plan for how you're going to pay back, how we're going to generate this money back and pay. So are we investing as a country to ensure that when we borrow, we are investing in infrastructure, we're investing in other projects that are going to spur economic growth, like we are talking about initially, such that you have a very healthy economy that can actually makes it much easier to mobilize much higher revenue. So, and of course the experts are already telling us that our debt is still sustainable. We've not yet defaulted. But of course, if it reaches the ceiling, then it brings in some concern. And especially like we were saying that you and me are not necessarily looking at the development in itself. So I think what needs to happen is aligning the borrowing to what projects we are running, and whether those projects are indeed going to spur the much needed economic development. Because if you borrow, invest, make a return, you can easily pay off the debt, just like an individual. But if you're borrowing, for example, for consumption, Mr. Jagenda, if you borrow to make a wedding function ceremony, chances that you default are much higher than if you borrowed to start a business. So I think that is where we need to align. Personally, I'm not concerned about the levels of debt. I'm only concerned about how this debt is being put to use. That is actually where it's not
bad to borrow, but what are we borrowing for?
It's not bad to borrow. Everyone borrows. But the question is, are we borrowing smartly? What are the interest rates we are getting? What are the other terms we are getting?
The conditions to them.
Yes.
Terms also.
Yeah. If a reasonable person was said to negotiate this in their own interest, would they do better? So if that is addressed, that we are borrowing smartly. Two, at times it also hurts when you hear reports that we borrowed, maybe the interest is running, but we've not used it.
Exactly.
So those are, I think that's the discipline that now we may look at. So also we've had to rebase the economy in order maybe to look at the ceiling. Is that the right thing to do? If it is, then so be it. But the biggest issue is, when we are borrowing, what are we investing in? Is it power generation? It's welcome. Over time, some of these are bound to pay dividend. If it's a road construction, yes. But we need to borrow and invest smartly, so that our projects are either not inflated. You don't want also to borrow at the right rate for the right reason, but they tell you that what actually you constructed for $1 billion, you could have done at 700. So that is now the discipline we need. Okay. And of course, the other things are I think, sentimental and for many of the citizens. When they perceive either what they call, should I call it, unnecessary kind of expenditure, especially given the tough times that we are in. So I think that could also add to the discussion. But I think in terms of the national debt, should we borrow? I think every government does that. I think Uganda should borrow. For what? is the question.
Okay.
How we do that.
Finally, this particular budget has also looked into the parish development model, which is looked at as a game changer. I need to hear your thoughts as an accountant from that angle. Do you think the PDM is actually going to perform some miracles as we wait for the other miracle of the oils which will come in 2025?
I think as a Ugandan, I would like to be optimistic. Technically, did we need the parish development model? It's arguable.
Okay.
We may not have needed it.
Technically.
We already have several other schemes that have come. The fruit we've not seen or we've not been aware of. So when now you're introducing a brand, because, and this is what we've been talking about consistency. What happened to Myoga? Because the truth of the matter is, if you're looking at Uganda and the economic development we're talking about, we need to be competitive. We need to have skilled labor. We need to address things like the ease of doing business. We need to address things like, say, corruption. Okay. So when you look at all that list, Uganda tends from the international indices that you see, we tend to be in the bottom half, and actually closer to the bottom than even to the middle. So those are the things that we need right now. Because if you say parish development model, we've had NADS, we've had Operation Wealth Creation, we've had about parish development model. Now, to an ordinary citizens, even they will not differentiate it. Mr. Jagenda, can you differentiate between what the parish development model is and how different it is from Operation Wealth Creation?
I can, but even members of parliament, some can't differentiate. I can.
Yes.
I know. PDM is more agro-based, and the other one was service-oriented also. But I think we harbor the same sentiments of before we conceptualize one, then we get onto another. Before we understand one, then we again pick up another. And of course, there are several schemes, and you know, once the people don't pick the vision, then I don't think it can actually be easy to implement it.
And precisely, that is where...
as we conclude.
Yes, and precisely, I think that's where the sentiments are. That we seem, you know, this our generation has been labeled the throwaway generation. It doesn't work, we throw it away, try again. But the question is, have the lessons been learned? So if the lessons are not learned, because it's the same ultimate goal, to create wealth.
Socio-economic transformation.
That's exactly the same goal. So the question is, the different ways in which we are trying to achieve this, are they practical? Are they different? I'm optimistic, or the PDM may deliver fruit as any other Ugandan, but technically I think it will meet the same challenges that brought down NADS, the same challenges that Operation Wealth Creation cannot be said to have been a success, the same challenges that Myoga have not worked. The issues of accountability, the issues of administration are likely to be an issue in the PDM as well.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Gilbert Ruchiri Ariho. He's the head of tax at PKF Uganda. I thank you so much for having allowed to grace us with your time this morning as we also prepare for the state, I beg your pardon, for the budget reading for 2022-2023 this very afternoon. To once again remind you on the 26th of this month, the full coronation of Bishop David Livingstone Ivan Jagala to the position of a UN Peace Ambassador will be on. And the Vice President, Her Excellency Major Retired Jessica Lupo, will be expected to be in attendance, and we very much want to congratulate Bishop Jagala Livingstone upon this very big milestone. We congratulate you. Again, thank you, Comrade Ariho, for joining us, and of course, to you, our viewers out there, we just let you know that we'll be here at before 2 o'clock this afternoon when we get to the budget reading over 2022-2023. Stay blessed. For God and my country, my name is Jagenda Semakola Ziksoka. Shalom. Thank you.
Live from UBC Studios.